All right, video number 1 of the King's Gambit theory series. Today we are going to be starting with the main line, of course. It's called the main line for a reason, and let's get into it. So, King's Gambit. The point of the King's Gambit, destabilize black center. If they take, which is the main line, we get full control of the center in the middle game, and that is the true point. So you just make this pawn go over to the F file. They don't have an E pawn anymore. Full central control. So e takes f4. There's multiple lines here. For example, there's a bishop c4 line where your king ends up on f1. I'm going to recommend knight f3, stopping this check from the queen and blockading the f pawn so it cannot move. It cannot sacrifice it in any way, shape, or form, where making it stay on f4 where we will recapture it. And now we're not going to look at the Fischer defense. Might do that one next. We're going to look at g5. Black tries to hold on to the pawn on f4. Now this is the base of the pawn chain, and you want to attack the base of the pawn chain. That's how you destabilize pawn chains, by attacking the base of it. Now, really black only has one move. They can't go h6. We take. They cannot take back because our rook wins their rook. They cannot take with the queen because our knight is on f3. The worst option is f6. I hope you guys get this in your game sometime. f6 basically leads to mate, in that we sacrifice the knight on g5. Knight takes g5, opening up the queen to the exposed king. Now after pawn takes, queen h5 check. They have to go king e7, that is forced, and then again we take with check. Ironically, whenever I do get this, I always get king to e8, even though that is the worst move. They should go knight f6. You are still winning. King f7 would be a joke because you just take the queen. Maybe not a joke, but definitely a blunder. Knight to f6. This knight is pinned. This king is obstructing the queen. Pawn to e5. A very good move. You're going to win the piece back. You don't even need to win the piece back immediately. Like, for example, let's say they get out of the pin. You don't need to take this knight. In fact, you could just take this pawn out of one pin into another. Bad positions typically tend to remain bad. Again, no reason to take the knight. They might be trying to manually castle, but you can just jump in. Congrats if they manually castle. You would just take this knight with the pawn. Your king is very safe in the center. You can block any check if it were to come. They would probably recapture. Let's say they took with the rook. A queen trade, you'd already be winning. Let's say they took with the rook. They cannot block because of the pinned queen. And if they go king h8, you can even play something calm like pawn to b3 and work that pin. They are going to get checkmated. So if they block with their king on e7, that is not good, even though it is their best move. Probably what they're going to do is go king e8, be like, okay, I'm fine losing a rook. I'll just go queen e7. Maybe I'll take the pawn on e4 with check and have some counterplay. Wrong they are. Queen h5 check. First, you want to draw the king back towards the center of the board, because now when you go queen e5 check, they cannot block because the queen is that much closer to the king. So they're forced to go king f7. Again, do not take the rook when there is better. Checkmate is better than winning a rook. So bishop c4 check. We'll go over d5. First, we'll go over king g6. Honestly, the easier of the two. You could see that they are beginning to get into a mating box. So you would get king h6. Queen takes f4. If queen g5, you would take this bishop on f8. The king is trapped, so they need a block, and you get a pawn checkmate. You could go pawn to d4. They do say control the center in chess, but both of them are checkmate. Another option they could do is, okay, let's say they go king g7. King g7, just delaying the inevitable. I would go queen f7 check, and then d3. Again, their only move is queen g5. You don't even need to take the queen because queen takes bishop is mate. So that is why f6 is very bad. It's not going to make a difference if they go d5. Again, we're just going to take this pawn. They are forced again to g6, and it's very similar. King h6, queen takes check, queen g5, you take, queen g7, checkmate. So d5 is just going to be one extra move that they have to delay checkmate by one move. So that's f6. That is very bad. So we went over f6, we went over h6. The only move they have in this position is g4. Now there are two lines. There is knight to g5 and there is knight to e5. Knight to g5, there's more things to review, so let's look over knight to e5. If you guys like knight to e5 better, I can make a more in-depth video regarding it. Basically, they're going to get their knight out, defending the pawn, attacking our pawn. We are going to take their pawn. Would not make sense for them to take our knight because then we're going to collect with interest in the center of the board. So it would make sense for them to take our central pawn. Now here a cool line is going d3. You kick the knight out. If you kick the knight in, which is probably where they're going to go because this looks very good, then you actually just sack the rook. You're like, okay, you take my rook, but I'm ahead in development. It would then go queen e2 check. Bishop e7 would be a horrible blunder. Do you see why? This bishop is pinned. This knight can exploit the pin, and after king to f8, this would actually be checkmate in the center of the board with just a bishop and a knight. So that is pretty amazing. If queen e7, again, you just exploit the pin. King d8, it looks like we're forced to trade queens and we'll be down material. However, there's bishop takes c7. The king is forced to take, and then you get a fork in the center of the board. They should not go towards the center. They should go back. And amazingly enough, this position is equal, believe it or not. They do have a lot of material for the queen. It's going to be pretty hard for them to get this knight out in any way, shape, or form, even if it gets to f2. Where is it going from f2? So this knight, potentially you could win it later on. I do like white's position, but I'm just such a fan of knight g5 that I don't play this line. If you would like to play this line, then I can go more in depth into it. Let's look over knight g5 though. Fun chess. So knight g5, if they go f6, again, it's going to be the same thing. This would be a transposition to the mating line that we looked at. So f6, always a bad move. h6, not a bad move. This is theory. Knight takes f7. You basically say, hey, these pawns are overextended. Your king looks pretty weak, and right you would be. Now, many people in this position, I'm surprised, honestly, play bishop c4, which is not a good move. The reason bishop c4 is not a good move is because after bishop takes d5, yes, it looks like you're winning the pawn with check, which you are, but the point of d5 was actually to guard against queen takes g4, and it's still a hard position for black to play. But in my opinion, you just don't have enough here. It's black will eventually get out of it. You do definitely have compensation, but I do highly recommend pawn to d4. Pawn to d4. Now, they're going to be happy you didn't go bishop c4 check, so they're going to go pawn d5 most of the time. Now, you take the f pawn first because it's all about opening up the f file. And after they recapture, you would go bishop to c4 check. And now you are more developed. For example, you're ready to castle. You have the open f file. Things are looking good. So one way it could go is king g7. This is typically where they find safety with their king. You want to castle. They might think, hey, you blundered an h-pawn. You did not blunder an h-pawn. Bishop to e5 check. Their knight cannot go to f6. You would just take, and now you are winning the queen. So that is a good line. If they go king g6, it does not get much better. You should just go queen e2 and break in and be like, how are you going to defend against checkmate? Right? Like they can't go bishop f5. It looks like it patches all the holes. There are sacrifices all over the place. King takes f5. They would be getting mated here with queen to f1 check. And after the king moves, wherever it moves, well, I guess if it goes to g6, you would come to f7. And then this would be a mating box. And similarly, if it went to g5, you would just throw in this check first, and then you have the same mate. So that h-pawn is not hanging. Let's say they're like, okay, I'm a believer. I'm not going to take this h-pawn. Maybe I'm just going to develop knight to f6. Knight to f6, you want to bring your pieces out. They may go bishop to e7. They may go knight to c6. Whatever they do, you're just going to build pressure in the position. You're aiming at h6. Much of the time, this knight will get pinned. You'll be threatening knight takes, knight here. All your pieces are activated. They have not even developed their queen side. Let's say they go bishop e7. Still going to go knight c3. It's just a very common principle. Don't neglect your queen side. Get all your pieces into the game. Let's say they develop like this. You even have bishop takes c7. Point is, that after queen takes c7, there is rook f7 check. The king is forced to go to g6. You bring your knight in with a tempo. Now, they're going to lose their queen. If they take your rook, this is a discovered check, and you will end up winning the rook. If they move their queen, this would be checkmate. Their only move is queen takes f4, and you win the queen like this. It's actually even meaner to go h5 because you draw the king away from the you draw the king towards the rook file. The king is more misplaced, so there are more prospects there. Now, what else could they do? Potentially, they can go knight to f6. Knight to f6 is a move. I would just play pawn to e5, kicking out their knight. Their knight goes to h4. This is a mistake because you have queen takes g4, and you're picking up the whole house. They have to go knight to d5, and if they go knight to d5, again, you would just go queen takes g4. I guess they don't have to go knight to d5. I guess they could play knight to c6, for example, and if you are to take the pawn, they get some weird counterplay. So they're probably going to move this knight, and when they move this knight, you just recapture the pawn on g4 with a great game. Now, that is basically everything to this knight g5 line. Let me know if your opponents respond differently after pawn to g4, knight g5. Let me see if they do something else, and I'll make a video on it. But I hope you enjoyed. This is the main line, and this is lesson number 1 of King's Gambit theory. Have a good day.